All right, get ready, because today we're going to really use those brain muscles, huh? We're doing a deep dive on legal positivism,
Oh, yeah.
which basically asks what makes something law. You know, it's a question that sounds simple at first,
Right.
but it can get really complicated really fast.
Oh, absolutely.
And our guide for this journey is, of course, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Of course.
It's kind of like the philosopher's cheat sheet.
It is.
But don't worry, we're going to break it all down, okay?
Yeah.
So get this.
Okay.
Legal positivism says that law and morality aren't always the same thing.
Hmm.
Like they don't always go together.
Interesting.
So could a society have laws that are like totally unjust,
Yeah.
but they're still technically law?
Yeah.
And then there's this whole thing about a basic norm
Yeah.
that's supposed to be like the foundation of the whole legal system.
Yeah.
So, are you intrigued?
I am.
Because we're diving in.
Let's go.
Let's start with this idea that like whether a law exists depends on social facts, not on whether the law is actually good or bad.
Exactly.
And John Austin,
Yeah.
he was a legal scholar, he said this. He said, the existence of law is one thing. Its merit or demerit another.
Yeah, that's a very blunt way to put it.
It is, right? It's like saying a law can be terrible,
Yeah.
but it's still the law
Right. Exactly.
if it was made the right way.
Yeah.
So I guess it makes you think about how law are made and enforced
Right.
separate from whether you agree with it or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the difference
Yeah.
between a law that's morally sound and one that's just legal.
Right.
Because it followed the right steps.
Yeah.
Or whatever those steps might be in that society.
So, okay, let's say there's this old law
Yeah.
that's still on the books,
Right.
but it's like totally out of touch with today's values.
Right.
Maybe even like discriminatory or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would legal positivism be like, well, too bad. It's still the law.
Yeah. Essentially, it would. Legal positivism says that a law's legalness
Okay.
comes from things like legislation,
Yeah.
judicial decisions, even customs.
Okay.
These are the social facts that give it force.
Right, right.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Legal positivism is like a scientist
Yeah.
observing a specimen under a microscope.
Uh-huh.
They're describing its structure, its parts,
Yeah.
but they aren't saying if it's good or bad.
Right. Just describing it.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's about analyzing the nuts and bolts.
The mechanics.
Yeah, the mechanics of
Yeah.
the legal system.
Right.
Even if those nuts and bolts are like,
A little rusty
yeah, a little rusty.
or outdated.
Yeah, exactly. To understand this better,
Yeah.
I think we need to go back in time a bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
What were those early thinkers like
Yeah.
when they first started thinking about legal positivism?
Well, they focused on the idea of a sovereign.
A sovereign.
Yeah, the ultimate authority figure.
Like a king or a queen.
Yeah, like a king or a queen
Okay.
whose commands were the law.
Got it.
Thinkers like Jeremy Bentham
Okay.
and John Austin, they were big on this.
Okay.
It's called the imperatival theory of law.
So it's like whatever the king says goes.
Yeah.
But wasn't that kind of,
The simplistic.
yeah, a little simplistic, right?
It was, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
even back then,
Yeah.
power wasn't always just one person.
You're right. It was a very simplified view of power.
Yeah.
Even Austin himself knew that
Yeah.
the real world is more complicated.
Right.
But the point is,
Yeah. Yeah.
they wanted to define law in a clear and objective way.
Right. So no opinions or anything.
Yeah, detached from feelings.
Okay. That makes sense.
Especially when you consider how messy
Right.
moral debates can get.
Yeah, for sure.
So did this whole commands from the sovereign idea run into some problems?
Yeah, I bet it did.
Yeah.
I mean, is there really ever just one person calling the shots?
It doesn't really work that way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And as legal philosophy developed,
Yeah.
so did those attempts to define law.
Okay.
Which brings us to Hans Kelsen.
Okay.
He was a very influential legal theorist.
Yeah.
He offered a different view.
Okay.
He still thought law had a singular form,
Okay.
but he shifted the focus from commands to a system of norms.
Norms.
Yeah.
Now I'm picturing like table manners.
Not quite.
Okay.
Kelsen was talking about legal norms,
Okay.
rules backed by the authority of a legal system.
Okay.
He saw law as this web of norms,
Yeah.
all connected,
Okay.
each one getting its validity from a higher norm.
So like imagine a pyramid.
Yes, a pyramid,
Okay.
with each level supporting the one above it.
So like a local law gets its power from a state law,
Right.
which gets its power from the national
I bet
constitution.
exactly.
Okay, and at the top of this pyramid,
The very top
Yeah.
sits the basic norm,
the basic norm.
the source of validity for the whole legal system.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What exactly is this basic norm?
It's like the foundation,
Okay.
the bedrock of the entire legal structure.
Okay.
Kelsen argued that you can't just keep explaining laws
Right.
by pointing to higher laws.
Just go on forever.
Exactly, an endless loop.
Yeah.
So you need this fundamental assumption
Okay.
that everyone accepts.
Right.
It's the starting point
Right.
for why laws have power.
So it's like the foundation of a house.
Yeah, good analogy.
You can't see it,
Right,
but the whole house depends on it.
exactly.
So like both Austin and Kelsen,
Yeah.
they were trying to find that ultimate source of legal authority.
Yes, the thing that makes law, law.
Right, exactly.
That's a great way to put it.
But even though Kelsen's system of norms was more sophisticated.
Then the simple command model.
Yeah.
It still left some unanswered questions.
Like what?
Like what exactly this basic norm,
Yeah,
how do we even know it exists?
right.
And that's where HLA Hart comes in.
Yeah.
Another big name in legal positivism.
Okay, so Hart's going to answer those questions.
We'll see.
All right, so we've gone from kings giving orders to a whole network of norms leading to this mysterious basic norm.
Right.
But I got to say, it still feels a little abstract to me.
Yeah.
So where does HLA Hart fit into all of this?
Right.
He's like a really important figure in legal positivism.
He
right?
is, yeah. Hart's work is considered super important in modern legal positivism.
Okay.
He agreed with Kelsen that law works as a system of rules,
Yeah.
but he wanted to ground those rules in something more real, something you could actually observe.
Okay, so less about abstract ideas and more about how law actually works in the real world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For Hart, the key to understanding legal authority is something he called the rule of recognition.
The rule of recognition.
And this isn't some mystical concept like the basic norm, okay? It's a social rule. And it exists because officials in a legal system actually use it
Okay.
to decide what counts as real law.
So it's like the playbook, right?
Right.
That judges and lawmakers use
Right.
to decide which laws are legitimate. Not like some, cosmic order, but more like...
Yeah, a set of understandings and practices.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a good way to think about it is like a referee in a sports game.
Okay.
They're not making up the rules, right? They're going by the rule book that everyone agrees on.
Right. The players, the coaches, even the fans.
Everyone, right? And
Yeah.
if someone tries to change the rules during the game,
Yeah.
that's when you get those arguments,
Right. Like those are the rules we agree to play by.
Exactly.
So is Hart saying that this rule of recognition
Yeah.
is like the ultimate rule book for the whole legal system?
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's the criteria that's used to figure out which laws are actually valid.
Okay.
And it's because everyone accepts this rule of recognition
Right.
that the whole system works.
So for Hart, it's all about these social rules
Right.
that are accepted and used by the people who enforce them.
Exactly.
That's the social fact that makes law, law.
You got it. It's the fact that they accept this specific rule,
Yeah.
not about whether the laws themselves are good or bad.
Okay, so this has been bugging me.
Okay.
We've been talking about this separation between law and morality.
Right.
Like they're two ships passing in the night.
Yeah.
But doesn't morality have to play some kind of role in law?
Mhm.
I mean, don't we want our laws to be fair?
Of course.
To be just?
Right. That's a question that's always been there for legal positivism.
Really?
Yeah, and it's true that some of the early positivists, they didn't really do a good job of addressing it.
Okay.
They focused so much on commands and force, it made law seem pretty cold.
Right, like just follow the rules or else.
Exactly.
And don't even ask if they're fair.
Yeah, like that.
So I'm guessing later thinkers like Hart,
Yeah.
they knew that was a problem, right?
Yeah, they did. Hart, for example, he said that morality can influence law,
Okay.
but he was very clear that it's not what makes something law.
Okay.
He used this example of a poisoner. Okay.
Who uses the law to get their victims money.
Wow.
The laws themselves are totally valid.
Right.
Even though the poisoner is using them for a bad reason.
So the law itself is neutral. It's
Well-
like a tool that can be used for good or for evil.
Exactly.
Okay, but doesn't that raise some concerns?
Yeah.
Like, if you can separate law and morality so easily,
Right.
what's to stop a legal system from becoming totally unjust?
That's a valid concern, and it's one that critics of legal positivism bring up a lot.
I bet.
In fact, one of the most famous critics was Ronald Dworkin.
Okay.
He directly challenged Hart's view.
Okay.
He said that law is inherently interpretive,
Okay.
and that judges have to rely on moral principles sometimes,
Okay.
especially in cases where the law isn't clear.
So Dworkin is saying that judges can't just blindly follow the rules.
Right.
Sometimes they have to deal with those messy moral questions,
Exactly.
especially when the law doesn't give them easy answers.
Yeah.
He believed that these moral principles, which he actually called principles,
Okay.
to separate them from legal rules.
Okay.
He believed they really matter, and they can influence legal decisions, even if they're not written down in a law.
So for Dworkin, morality is like built into the law,
Right.
not just some outside thing that might influence it sometimes.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And this is where things get even more interesting, right?
Yeah.
Dworkin's critique caused this debate within legal positivism itself.
Okay. Between what we call inclusive positivism and exclusive positivism.
Wow, those names sound like some kind of clubs,
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
But it all boils down to this. Can moral principles actually become part of the law?
Okay.
Or do they just influence how the law is applied?
Right.
Inclusive positivists say that moral principles can be part of a legal system
Okay.
through its sources, like a constitution that says judges should consider fairness.
So basically, inclusive positivists are saying that morality can become law if it's been adopted the right way.
Exactly.
Okay.
But exclusive positivists, they push back on that.
They do.
Yeah. They say that even when we use moral ideas in legal reasoning,
Yeah.
they don't automatically become part of the law.
That's a tricky distinction.
It is, yeah.
So exclusive positivists are saying even if a judge uses a moral principle in their decision,
It doesn't mean that principle is now a new law, right? They maintain that a law gets its power from its source, legislation, precedent, and so on.
Yeah.
And moral considerations might influence how we understand those sources,
Okay.
but they don't become law themselves.
Okay, think of it like this.
Okay.
A judge might say, it would be unfair to punish someone for a crime they didn't commit.
Right.
That doesn't mean that unfairness is now a legal principle in every case.
Right. It's just a reason for the judge's decision in that specific case.
Gotcha. So this whole debate is making my head spin a little.
I know, it gets complicated.
Yeah, but I'm starting to get it. It's like we're peeling back the layers,
Yeah, like an onion.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just keeps getting more and more complex.
Right, and this brings us to another big question.
Okay.
If legal positivism is right,
Yeah.
and a law isn't automatically good just because it's legal,
Yeah.
then how do we decide whether the laws we live by are actually good?
Right. It's one thing to understand where laws come from,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to think about what they mean morally.
Exactly. I mean, history is full of laws that were technically valid,
Right.
but they were terrible.
Absolutely. And that's where legal positivism makes us face some hard truths about the nature of law and how it can be misused. There's this concept called the fallibility thesis.
The fallibility thesis.
Yes. Yeah, and it captures this idea that just because something is law doesn't mean it's good or just...
So basically it's saying, hey, laws can be wrong.
Exactly.
Don't just assume they're right because they're written down somewhere.
Exactly. It acknowledges that law can be used for bad purposes.
Right.
It can be unjust.
Yeah.
It can fail to serve the common good.
And this leads to another idea. What's it called?
The separability thesis.
The separability thesis. Okay, tell me about it.
It argues that there isn't always a connection between law and morality.
Okay.
Like, they can interact,
Yeah.
but there's no guarantee that a law will always be moral.
So it's like they're two separate things.
Right.
A law can be legal without being moral.
Yeah.
And the other way around.
Exactly.
But that's where things get really complicated, right?
They do.
Because even though it's helpful to think about these concepts separately,
Right.
in the real world, they're always bumping into each other.
Exactly. And that creates all kinds of dilemmas.
Right. It's like we're seeing the cracks in this neat separation between law and morality. But if there's no necessary connection,
right.
Doesn't that mean a legal system could just totally abandon justice?
That's a question that legal philosophers have been debating forever.
I bet.
Critics of the separability thesis say that there are these inherent connections between law and morality that we can't just ignore.
Like what?
Well, many legal systems deal with fundamental moral issues,
Yeah.
like protecting people from harm,
Right.
upholding rights, ensuring fairness.
So even if you try to define law just in terms of procedures,
Right.
you can't escape these huge moral questions
You can't, no.
that shape how we live together.
Exactly, and that brings us to the concept of justice aptness.
Justice aptness.
It's the idea that we should judge law in moral terms.
So you're saying that law is always open to moral scrutiny,
Right.
even if its origins are just social or procedural. Yeah.
We can't just say, well, it's the law, so it must be okay.
Right. We have to ask if it's just,
Exactly.
if it's fair, if it respects people.
Exactly.
You're right on the money.
This idea of justice aptness shows that the relationship between law and morality is way more complicated than just a simple separation.
It's like we're seeing the limits of this is and ought distinction
Right.
that legal positivism started with.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's even more to uncover here.
There is. There's a
Yeah.
lot more to explore.
Okay, so we've talked about the foundations of legal positivism, from commands to norms to social rules, and we've kind of started to see how it bumps up against these really tricky questions about law and morality.
Right.
It's like we built this really intricate puzzle,
Yeah.
but now we have to figure out what the picture actually means.
Right. Right.
So what are some of the key takeaways? And maybe like common misunderstandings that we should talk about?
Yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions is that legal positivism means you always have to obey the law,
Right, no matter what.
no matter what.
Or that it leads to this idea that, like, anything goes, morally speaking.
Right, like there's no right or wrong.
It's like people hear law is separate from morality, and they think legal positivists are saying we should all just be robots, blindly following orders.
Right, but that's not what the theory is about at all.
Oh.
Remember, legal positivism is about the nature of law,
Okay.
not about telling us what to do.
So it's not a moral theory.
Right, it's more like,
Yeah.
think of a map of a city.
Okay.
It doesn't tell you where to go.
Yeah.
It just shows you the streets.
Right, so the map analogy is helpful.
Yeah.
Gives you the information, but it doesn't say whether you should, like, take a walk in the park, or
Yeah.
rob a bank or something.
Exactly. That's up to you and your own sense of right and wrong.
Right, right.
Legal positivists can have really strong opinions about which laws are just or unjust.
Okay.
They might even be fighting for legal reform,
Yeah.
but they start from the idea that a law's legalness
Yeah.
comes from where it came from, how it was made,
Okay.
not its moral content.
So it's a way of looking at law in a more objective way,
Right.
without necessarily saying you agree with every law.
Exactly. And that brings us to the neutrality thesis,
The neutrality thesis, okay.
which is the idea that legal philosophy itself should try to be neutral.
Okay.
Not making value judgments, just describing law as it is.
Okay.
But, like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
that's a pretty tricky idea.
Right, because even choosing what questions to ask about law,
Yeah.
what to focus on,
Right.
can be influenced by our values, you know?
Exactly. So while legal positivism gives us a way to understand law in a more objective way,
Yeah.
it doesn't say it's totally neutral or value-free.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm still thinking about this tension
Yeah.
between separating law and morality
Right.
and the fact that laws have real consequences in our lives. You know,
Mhm.
like if a law is unjust,
Yeah.
but it's still the law,
Yeah.
what are we supposed to do?
That's the big question, and legal positivism doesn't try to give a definitive answer.
Yep.
So I think one of the most important things about this theory is that it encourages us to think critically about law.
Okay.
It reminds us that law isn't some perfect thing.
Right.
It's made by humans, so it can have flaws, biases, and it can be abused.
So we shouldn't just blindly accept what the law says.
Right. We should question it
Challenge it.
and demand that it reflects our moral standards.
Yeah. Exactly.
Legal positivism gives us the tools to do that.
It does.
Yeah, it lets us separate what is from what ought to be,
Okay.
to look at how legal systems work,
Yeah.
and to have real debates about what kind of laws we want.
It's like saying, okay, we get how this machine works,
Right.
but is it giving us the results we want?
Exactly.
And if not, how can we fix it? Or even build a better machine?
That's a great way to put it. And it leads us to the idea of the rule of law,
Okay.
which people often see as this ideal for a just society, you know.
Right.
So does legal positivism support the rule of law?
Well, it seems like it would have to.
Yeah.
I mean, the rule of law is all about having clear laws
Right.
that are applied fairly.
Consistently.
And that seems to fit with how positivists focus on the source of laws.
You're right. Legal positivism doesn't necessarily say the rule of law is a moral ideal,
Okay.
but it helps us understand how the rule of law is even possible.
Okay.
Think about Hart's idea of the rule of recognition.
Yeah.
Having a shared understanding of what counts as law
Right.
is so important for the rule of law because
Yeah.
it means everyone's playing by the same rules.
Right. It's like saying, if we're going to have laws, everyone needs to know what they are,
Exactly.
right, and how they work,
Yeah.
or else it's just chaos.
Right. Total chaos.
Yeah.
And this focus on clarity and consistency in the law.
Right.
And making sure everyone can access the laws.
Yeah.
A lot of legal positivists see that as a way to prevent tyranny
Okay.
and to create a just legal system.
So legal positivism is kind of like a toolbox
Yeah.
for building a more just and equal society.
It is.
It gives us the tools to analyze and critique and even change legal systems.
That's a great way to think about it.
Wow, this deep dive has really shown me how powerful legal positivism is.
It is.
Not just as a theory, but as a way to understand the world.
Yeah.
It's made me realize that law isn't just some set of rules.
Right.
It's a system that's always changing.
It is.
And we all have a role in shaping it.
That's the spirit. And if you want to learn more,
Yeah.
I definitely recommend checking out that Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on legal positivism and reading people like Hart, Kelson, Raz, and Workin.
Okay, cool.
There's so much interesting legal philosophy out there.
And remember, dear listener, just because something's the law
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's right.
Exactly.
So stay curious, keep questioning, and keep on deep diving.